sounding like Speaker Kevin McCarthy's preference is to pass a short-term spending patch called a continuing resolution or a CR to maintain current spending levels and avert a shutdown. But is this realistic considering it's not long lasting? Brandon Arnold serves as the executive vice president at the National Taxpayers Union and joins us to discuss this now. Brandon, we've seen this time and time again. Any issue in Washington, there are about 30 different opinions. We had Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene on the show yesterday, and she said, I'm not going to vote to fund the government if we don't proceed with an impeachment inquiry, because how else are we going to send a message and shut down this weaponized government? And I think that that's true. At the same time, it's true that if you shut down the government, it costs American taxpayers even more. What do you see happening?
Yeah, I think it's time to get out the popcorn and sit back and enjoy what's going to be a wild few weeks here.
Good answer.
MTG has her demands. There's 535 members of Congress, and I think they are all approaching this with a similar manner, and that is we're going to put our foot down and insist on getting our way. Otherwise, we're not going to vote for this package of spending bills. The problem here is that we need to fund the government. And when we do shut down the government, we've done it several times in recent memory, conservatives almost always lose. We shut down the government for a few days or sometimes a little bit longer, and then somebody gives in, there's a breaking point, and we end up spending more money as a result. All of those federal employees that were spending time on TikTok or checking their fantasy football league or what have you, we give them all money and a little bit extra for their trouble and send them back to work, and we lose. So we need to find a way to win here, and I think that starts with passing good conservative spending bills through the appropriations process in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think, well, just because Kevin McCarthy agreed to the 1% floor reduction, that you can't cut more than that. But actually, there's nothing preventing the House from cutting some things and making it a tighter thing, kicking it to the Senate and coming up with a deal. Is that in the cards, you think?
Maybe. I think they've cut a good bit. And
yeah.
Listen, if the three of us are writing these appropriations bills, we're going to write them much leaner and more fiscally responsible. We're going to cut a lot of stuff. But at the end of the day is if you don't get to 218 votes, whatever work you put into creating those bills is for naught, because they're not going anywhere. You have to pass a bill that gets to 218. And the spending is obviously what people talk about the most. But what I like to look at in these appropriations bills are what's called riders. And these are policy provisions to block the Biden administration from implementing some of its policies through the regulatory process, circumventing Congress. Congress can get to these, and that means reining in potentially the Department of Labor, the IRS, the FTC, some of these rogue agencies. They can get to them through the appropriations process, but again, only if they actually pass these bills.
Yes, that's right. And Brandon, it seems like Republicans and Democrats are certainly going in opposite directions when it comes to appropriations. But I have to think to myself, there have to be some issues where Democrats see them as ludicrous as they are. I remember, 5 or 10 years ago when we heard that the government was funding research to determine why lesbians on average were more overweight than straight women. And I have to think that there have to be some issues where Democrats would be willing to cut spending as well. Aren't there?
There are. There are some very reasonable Democrats out there that want to see leaner, more efficient government. And I think we need to extend an olive branch and work with these individuals because heaven knows this problem was created in a bipartisan basis. Throughout the years, Republicans and Democrats have teamed up together to spend far too much money. And eventually it's going to need to be solved in a bipartisan process because guess what? Republicans have the House. They don't have the Senate. They don't have the White House. So we're going to need to get Democratic votes to get a solution here. And I think there's a lot out there. I think there's a lot of Republicans that have kind of abandoned the neocon philosophy when it comes to foreign policy that are looking for ways to save money in the defense budget. I think that's fantastic. We don't want to reduce our ability to launch those wars when we absolutely need to, but let's find some ways there. Let's find those weapon systems that maybe we don't need that are, helping a defense contractor purchase a cabin in Tahoe rather than actually improving our national defense in any meaningful way. Let's find those. Let's reach out in a bipartisan manner, and let's try to get this federal budget under control.
Yeah, I think that's a win for the American people. That's what American people asked for when they put the Republicans in charge. There's a big elephant running through the room, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but the cost of servicing our debt is going through the roof with interest rates. That's going to be, someone's coming to pay the piper pretty quickly on that. How big a complication is that in cutting budget? Because that's an uncontrolled expense. As long as interest rates are up, that's going to go up. it's adding a lot of pressure in the room, isn't it?
Oh, tremendous pressure. And, we're going to see a national deficit that is the annual amount of money that we're running in the red of $2 trillion pretty soon.
Wow.
So we're just heaping money, dollar after dollar, on that national debt, on the credit card, and those interest payments. That's the fastest growing portion of the federal budget right now, interest payments on the debt. And as you know, John, as interest rates rise, and they've risen considerably, 5 percentage points in the last year and a half, it becomes more and more expensive to finance our national debt. So that becomes an absolutely enormous burden on federal taxpayers to the tune of, outgrowing our defense budget. And if we let it keep running, it's soon going to outgrow even things like Medicare, our biggest federal programs. It's going to exceed them if we don't get a handle on them.
It's crazy.
Trouble ahead. John and I, a few weeks ago, were at the Republican debate, and I think it was Nikki Haley who said what you said, which is our debt, our fiscal issues, there are equal parts blame on both sides of the aisle. Do you think that that's going to be a more prominent message among Republican candidates going into the primary? Is it a winning message?
I hope so, because, I think what we've seen from Republican voters is they want honesty. They want people to tell them the truth. And I think we've seen far too much partisanship. Partisanship is kind of the enemy of the truth in many instances here, because so many of these folks that are running for president have been senior members of the federal government. They've been members of Congress, president, vice president, you name it. And honestly, they all have a little bit of blood on their hands. Some of them have a lot of blood on their hands when it comes to our federal deficit. They've all contributed to higher spending. They've all contributed to irresponsible tax increases in some instances. So we do need to get a handle on our federal deficit, on our federal budget, and we need people to be honest about it. This is a poll that we just did a poll in New Hampshire looking at some of the issues that voters are most concerned about. And fiscal issues are right at the top of the list. Getting our budget under control, improving our tax climate, all of these things are really, really high on the list of voters.
Yeah.
Boy, that is all we heard when we were in Milwaukee. Just fiscal, economy, over and over again. That was the number one issue. Brandon, we appreciate having you on. I think that come October 1st, we're going to have you back on to talk about what transpired the day before. All right, everybody. We're going to take a very quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. We will be back.